What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. All the way back in November of last year, I took on the Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, which at the time was the most requested video I'd ever put out. Although I've taken on Sword and Shield games during this time frame, you all have heavily requested that I check out the 5th generation. And today we're going to do just that. Today we're going to find out how easy you can complete Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Black and White. Considering that this challenge, as well as the catch-em-alls, are staples to my channel at this point, it's really not that surprising that you really wanted me to take this one on. But for those who keep up with this challenge on the subreddit, you know that there are some unique additions that make this a lot more difficult than any of the other games we've completed before. If you have no idea what the Professor Oak challenge is, I've included a playlist that you can check out in the top right of your screen to better understand what this video is all about. Regardless, let's go over the rules that are set in place. The first rule is you have to catch every Pokemon that's available before each gym badge. The second rule is that you're only allowed to use one copy of the game. This means that things like trait evolutions and version-exclusive Pokemon won't be available. This makes it as accessible to everyone as possible, and for those who are worried, there will be plenty of Pokemon that we're going to have to grab. The third and final rule is that no exploits or glitches can be used. This is pretty much a staple to all the challenges, but I still wanted to mention it regardless. Before we get into this challenge, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more content like this. And with that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So our story begins all the way in Nuvema Town, where we meet Sharon and Bianca, and right off the bat we can pick out our starter that we're going to have to bring through the entire challenge. Although they all evolve at the same level, the technical best Pokemon that you can choose is Oshawott. Because it can eventually learn False Swipe, it can make the collecting portion of this challenge a little bit faster than the other options. If you're looking to do this as fast as possible, this is probably your best option, and if I'm being honest, you're going to want to save as much time as you can. After a couple introductory battles and collecting the Pokedex, we're thrown right into it all, starting with Route 1. Although the first two catching areas contain nearly the same Pokemon, it's best to not even bother with this area, and just head to Route 2 as quickly as you can to catch Pokemon at almost double the level that you normally encounter them. After completing some tutorial sequences and have a quick battle with N, we're able to head to the route to collect our first few catches. Here we can catch Patrat, Lillipup, and Purloin. Once we reach the end of the route, we can skip right through Strident City and enter the Dream Yard. After a couple matches, we can talk with this NPC and receive one of the monkeys based on which starter we chose. Because I chose Oshawott, they gave me Pansear. This brings the total to 5 Pokemon, and believe it or not, these are the only Pokemon that we have to catch for the first section of the challenge. You're probably thinking, wow, this has to be the easiest Professor Oak of all time. I mean, we caught more Pokemon in Let's Go, and you beat that challenge in a day. Which brings me to a very interesting part of the challenge. So when it comes to the grinding portion, we really only have 2 locations that we can train in, and that's routes 1 and 2. Now we're no stranger to long grinds, and in a majority of the games, the first section is usually the largest hoop they have to jump through. But this section is much different than the rest. In Generation 5, experience was forever changed in that rather than each Pokemon you defeat gives out the same experience no matter who takes it on, the mechanic was adjusted to include one very influential factor: the level of both the Pokemon battling. The way the new formula works is that if you encounter a Pokemon that's higher level than you and you defeat it, you receive more experience than if you were to battle it at the same level. Game Freak presumably wanted to add a rewarding bonus for taking down a fierce opponent, and for the most part this is a pretty solid feature. The biggest issue with this addition though is the fact that the value also works in the opposite direction. This means that if you're a higher level than the opponent that you're facing, you'll actually gain less experience than you would if you were at an equal level. This means that every time we level up a Pokemon while we're grinding in this challenge, we'll eventually reach a point where we're going to gradually gain less and less from every single battle. For example, if we train up our starter to level 35, it will need roughly 3,500 experience to get to the final evolution. If we calculate the experience curve, this means that we fight a level 7 Lillipup every single battle, we would earn 19 XP per battle, rather than the 78 that we would normally get if we were on equal level. This means that rather than having to grind out 45 battles to get to the next level, we'll have to do 185, which is over 4 times as long as the standard experience. So with all this in mind, how in the world can we do this before we turn 40? Well, if you watch my Professor Oak's challenge for Ruby and Sapphire, you know that collecting rare candies with a pickup ability takes up a very large portion of the challenge, and this is definitely no exception. Thankfully, Lillipup is able to collect them quite easily, but it's important to remember that because rare candies dropped way too frequently in Gen 3, Emerald and onwards change the drop percentage based on what level the Pokemon is. Between levels 21 and 40, there's a 4% chance that we'll get one after every battle, and leveling up any higher than that would be extremely suboptimal. That being said, the most optimal choice for leveling up your Pokemon can either be one of these options: having a squad of level 21 Lillipups while we grind each Pokemon, or only 4 of them and 1 Lillipup with Vital Spirit. With this ability in the first slot of your party, any encounter we find will have a 50% chance of being on the higher end of the encounter levels, which in turn increases your chance of getting more XP per battle. I chose to go with this option because it's statistically faster to do, but it still took a crazy amount of time to complete this section. Patrat and Purloin were the only Pokemon that I had to completely evolve from only wild battles, as I had a pretty solid chance of getting a few rare candies for each Pokemon I grind. I tried to calc it out and it came out to around a 1.9% chance from each battle, which is definitely nowhere near the almost 5% from Gen 3. But I'll take anything that will make this section easier. After about an hour and a half for each, Patrat evolved into Watchog, and Purloin evolved into Liepard. With this, we only have 2 more Pokemon that we have to evolve, but when you consider what I mentioned before, you're going to need to mix in a lot of grinding with some of those rare candies. I forgot to mention this before, but when it came out to grinding the initial Lillipups, they took about an hour and a half for each. This helped when it came time to evolve one of them into its final 2 evolutions, which initially may seem like it would be more harmful considering that I'll have an even lesser chance for drops in the next section, but considering that leveling gets significantly easier for each section, it's really not worth leveling another all the way from the beginning. That being said, evolving our starter took the longest part of the section. I started out by leveling both Pokemon to 25, and then progressively made my way up on Lillipup until I had enough rare candies to take care of them both. Although we got relatively good drop chances, I still had to get Lillipup all the way up to level 28 before I had enough rare candies to take care of the Oshawot's remaining levels. This process took about 6 hours for Lillipup, not including the first grind to 21, and another 4 hours to get Oshawott up to level 25. With this, Lillipup evolved into Herdier and Stoutland, and Oshawott evolved into Duat, and then into Samurott. This brings us to a total of somehow only 11 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon available before the first batch. Well, now that mess is taken care of, things should get a little easier, right? Thankfully, they do. After defeating Salon, we can make our way through some more interactions with Team Plasma before being able to progress west of Striaton City. Before we head that way, now that we can access the extension to the Dream Yard, we can go into the grass and catch Muna. Upon reaching Route 3, we have a battle with Charon, and then take on Team Plasma in the Wellspring Cave before we can freely encounter Pokemon wherever we want. On Route 3, we can catch Blitzel, and within the Wellspring Cave, we can catch Roggenrola and Woobat. But if you interact with the Dust Clouds, we can also catch Drillbur. Because we've completed the Team Plasma encounter, we can now interact with the new Shaking Grass to get Audino and Musharna in the Dream Yard. After heading to the end of Route 3, we can access Nacrene City, and unlike the previous section, we can actually go past this area to encounter a few more Pokemon. The Pinwheel Forest contains 2 sections, and until you defeat Lenora, you're only able to take on Pokemon outside. It's also important to note that now that we can access Doubles Grass, it's highly suggested that you encounter as much as you can here, because there's a very good chance you'll encounter much higher level Pokemon. Here we can catch Pidove, Timber, Timpole, and Throw in the grass, and through special encounters, we can get Sock, bringing the total to 23 Pokemon, as well as all the Pokemon that we can catch for this section. So although the distance from Gyms 1 and 2 is extremely small, there are still a lot of high-profile encounters that we'll have to evolve. But thankfully, there are much easier methods that we can now take advantage of. Now that we have access to the Shaking Grass, we can finally begin one of the most popular methods of leveling up our catches in Generation 5. Audino battles. For some reason, this Chansey knockoff gives out an absurd amount of experience, with level 15 encounters giving out over 1000 XP when you're at the same level. Even heading into the 30s, we're looking at values of over 500 XP, which is still leagues better than literally any other encounter at this point in the story. It's important to note that there's still a 5% chance you can find the semi-version exclusive Throw or Sock here, but compared to most Shaking Grass areas, this is one of the best locations to consistently find Audino. Another major benefit here is the ability to heal our Pokemon with the Nurse in this area, which saves an absurd amount of time as well, even though we're already pretty close to Nacrene City. Before we get into grinding, it's important that we head back into the Wellspring Cave and interact with the Dust Clouds. For every cloud you bike into, there's a 10% chance you'll receive a stone item, and the goal is to get a Firestone through the process. There are a total of 12 different stones, so it's expected that it'll take you a pretty long time, and it took me almost 2 hours to find the one that I needed. After using the item, Pansear evolved into Simisear. Now let's actually take on the grinding section. Out of all the Pokemon, Timber was by far the easiest Pokemon on the list to complete. Because of its immediate access to Low Kick and eventually Wake Up Slap, it was pretty easy to make quick work of every Audino that I encountered. After about 30 minutes, Timber evolved into Girder. Although Roggenrola needed pretty much the same amount of experience to evolve, the only really useful move it learns is Rock Blast, and as a result, it took quite a bit longer to make real progress. After a little over an hour, Roggenrola evolved into Boldore. Blitzel was a relatively straightforward Pokemon to train up, as you immediately can use Shockwave, but you won't learn another stab move until a couple levels before you need to evolve. In total, it took about 2 hours to evolve Blitzel into Zebstrika. Pidove and Drillbur took just about the same amount of work to evolve. Although they both evolve in the low 30s, there aren't a ton of great moves that they can learn, and a majority of the time you're just going to be spamming Air Cutter and Dig, which really drags out the battles until you get some of the later moves like Slash. After 2.5 hours for each, Pidove evolved into Tranquil and Unpheasant, and Drillbur evolved into Excadrill. Tympole, to no surprise, took the longest to evolve, as it was like leveling up a starter again. But thankfully it learns quite a few stab moves like Bubble Beam, Mud Shot, and even Muddy Water, which really cut down the amount of times I had to heal up. During this process, I managed to grab a few rare candies, so thankfully I was able to skip through the last 5 levels. After also about 2.5 hours, Tympole evolved into Palpitoad, and then into Seismitoad. During the grinding sessions, I carried Woobat in my team, and once I leveled everything else up, it only took a level for it to evolve into Swoobat. This brings a total of 33 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon you can obtain before the second badge. After a quick battle with Lenora at the museum, we can collect the second badge and make our way over to the intersection of the Pinwheel Forest to reclaim the stolen fossil head from Team Plasma. As we work our way through the grass, we can grab a majority of the Pokemon available for this section. Here we can catch Sewaddle, Venipede, and 2 Petalil for a trade that we'll take care of in a bit. As most of you know, this Pokemon evolves by a Sunstone, and this is one of the items you can get as a drop from the dust clouds that we used earlier. But if you interact with the shaken grass, there's a 5% chance you'll encounter a Lilligant. This can still take quite a while to occur, but considering that we're going to need to encounter Pansage and Panpour anyways, there's a pretty solid chance you'll find one along the way. After returning the fossil back to Berg and Lenora, we're able to exit through the north and take the Sky Arrow Bridge to Castelia City. Upon entering the city, if we stop and talk to this man right near the entrance, he'll give us a free evolution stone of our choice. Because I managed to collect a water stone earlier with the dust clouds, I chose to go with a leaf stone to really speed up the grinding for this section. Although this area is the location of the next gym, we're able to move all about the city, and if we head north, we can walk right into Route 4. If we head into the deep sand, we can catch Sandile, Darumaka, and Scraggy. This is going to be the last section for the area, as we're blocked off from heading further into the area due to the construction. If we head all the way back to Nacrene City and talk to this person, we can trade that second Petalil that we caught for the other version exclusive, Cottony. Now it's time to do a little bit of grinding. Although Audino can be found a couple levels higher inside the forest, the fact that it's only a 65% encounter rate makes it a lot less optimal than just grinding back outside like we did in the last section. The easiest Pokemon to evolve for this section was definitely Venipede. Initially it's a little annoying because it doesn't learn any good moves, but once you reach level 19 it can learn Poison Tail and then Bug Bite shortly afterwards. In total it only took a little under an hour to evolve Venipede into Whirlipede, and then into Scolipede. Darumaka was surprisingly an extremely easy Pokemon to train up. I really never knew that this little thing had a base attack of 90. But when you combine that with the Fire Fang and eventually Fire Punch, it only took a little bit of time before it was one-shotting Audino. After an hour, Darumaka evolved into Darmanitan. Sandile and Scraggy took nearly the same amount of time, and thankfully during this grinding, I collected a decent amount of rare candies to ease that level 40 grind. When it comes to Sandile, you're probably going to want to catch one at the lowest level you can, and that's only because it learns Bite at level 4. This works a lot better than Assurance, and you're going to stick with that move for a long time until you basically evolve it for the first time. Scraggy really only starts out with Feint Attack, but once you learn Brick Break, it will basically carry you all the way to the end. In total, it took about 4 hours to evolve both Sandile into Krokorok and Krookodile, and Scraggy into Scrafty. The final Pokemon that we're going to train up is Sewaddle, and because it evolves by friendship, I carried it through the grinding to quickly finish off this process. After grinding it up for a little bit, Sewaddle evolved into Swadloon, and then to Leavanny. In order to evolve Cottony, we're going to need to grab a Sunstone from the Dust Clouds, but thankfully I was unlucky in finding the Firestone, so I managed to grab one on top of the Waterstone I mentioned earlier. With all these stones, we can evolve Cottony into Whimsicott, Pansage to Simisage, and Panpour into Simipour. This brings a total of 54 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon available before the third batch. After some more interactions with Team Plasma and defeating Burke's gym, we can progress back north to Route 4 and battle Bianca and Charon. Before we touch Nimbasa City, it's important that we head west to the Desert Resort. Although it's mandatory to come back here later in the story, we still have to catch all the Pokemon in the area. Within the desert, we can catch Maractus, Dwebble, and Sigilyph, but if we head into the Relic Castle, we can also grab a couple more. On the first floor, we can encounter Yamask, but if we talk to this NPC, we can choose between one of these fossils. Since they both evolve at the same level, there really isn't a downside to either one, but personally I went with Archon because of its high damage output. While I was catching all these Pokemon, I managed to find a shiny Sandile in the Desert Resort, which is mind-blowing considering how I haven't found anything else while I was grinding up until this point. This is definitely a nice shiny, but I am not evolving this thing. Have you seen its evolutions? Ugh. After all that's taken care of, we can now make our way into Nimbasa City to collect the bicycle, and have a little ride on the Ferris wheel before taking on N. At this point, we're thrown right into the front of the gym, but we're allowed to head east or west to catch a few more Pokemon. Through regular grass encounters, we can catch Trubbish, Minccino, and Solosis, but we can also catch Cinccino and Emolga through the special encounters. This brings the total to 63 Pokemon. Because Elisa has to activate the drawbridge so we can head to the next city, we've reached another roadblock in the story. So let's take some time to grind over our catches and see what our best options are. Now, although the Pinwheel Forest is actually still a viable training option, Route 5 and Route 16 offer Audino at a much higher level, with the only sacrifice being that its encounter rate drops to 85% because of the inclusion of Emolga and Cinccino. The upside, however, is that these Audino range from level 19 to 22, which means that the standard experience rate is nearly 1500 experience if you fight at an equal level. Because there really isn't a great place to bike around on Route 5, I would advise only grinding on Route 16 because there's a small strip right in front of the grass which will generate more encounters. On the other side, considering that we have to go over to the Pinwheel Forest anyways to revive our fossil to get Archon, it gives a little more incentive to grind over here, but if you want this done the fastest, you'll probably want to grind on one of the most northern routes. Dwebble is by far the easiest Pokemon to evolve for this section. If you catch one on the higher level end, you'll almost immediately have access to dual stab options, and because Audino have a great chance of holding a berry, you'll heal in battle, which makes the initial few levels significantly easier. After about 45 minutes, Dwebble evolved into Crustle. Archon and Trubbish were also relatively easy Pokemon to evolve, and a very large part of that is because of their level up movesets. Although Archon may seem annoying because of its defeatist ability, we're still like 10 steps away from getting healed. And we also have the berry eating move Pluck, which is advised to only use if you get Acrobatics at level 28. Trubbish gets access to Sludge and eventually Sludge Bomb later in the grinding, and although its special attack isn't too great, these moves deal massive damage for a Pokemon at such a low level. After about an hour and a half for each, Archon evolved into Archeops, and Trubbish evolved into Garbodor. The last two Pokemon that we have to take care of are Yamask and Solosis, and although they evolve almost 10 levels apart from each other, Yamask has one small issue that makes the grind pretty annoying. Yamask's moveset is almost entirely Ghost-type moves, and if you look at its level-up moveset, there are very few TMs that are both useful and available at this point in the game. I figured that maybe Return would do a decent amount of damage, but I found it was a lot easier if I could just switch train it while I was working on Solosis. This Pokemon also has a relatively weak moveset, but at least Psyshock is powerful enough to sweep most Audino that you encounter. The major downside is that this move has only 10 PP, and the next good move that you'll get is probably Psychic at level 37. After about 2 hours, Yamask evolved into Cofagrigus, and because I gained a lot more XP on my own, it only took about an hour and a half to evolve Solosis into Duosion, and then into Reuniclus. This brings a total to 70 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon you can obtain before the 4th badge. Now that's all taken care of, we can head into Elisa's gym and collect the 4th badge, which allows us to take care of a few more battles on Route 5, as well as being able to access the Driftfield drawbridge. If you bike into one of these interactable spots on the map, we can catch Ducklet, bringing the total to 71 Pokemon. At the end of the bridge, we arrive at Driftfield City to meet Clay. We have to take care of a couple more events in the story before it's even an option to take him on. Before we do that, if we head into this building, we can talk to this NPC who is looking for a Minccino, and if we trade the second one we caught earlier, we receive Basculin in return. From here we can head south to the outer section of the cold storage, and the only Pokemon that we're going to have to collect here is going to be Vanillite, which thankfully we can find at a relatively high level. After completing another Team Plasma event and have an argument at the gym, we now have access to take on the 5th gym. Before we do that, we still have access to the northern route of encounters. Route 6 is the final location for this section, as we're completely blocked off from any new areas until Clay clears out the wall to charge Stone Cave. That being said, there are quite a few new Pokemon that can be collected here. Here we can catch Deerling, Carablast, and Fungus, which brings us to just about half of the Unova Regional Pokedex. Now let's check out the grinding portion of this section. Although we have advanced only a little bit in the story, the wild level of Audino have increased by 3, which means that if we fight a level 25 with a Pokemon at the same level, we'll earn just shy of 2,000 experience. And even on the lower end, we're looking at only a couple hundred less. Starting out our list is going to be Vanillite. This Pokemon evolves at level 47, which is by far the highest level we've ever had to train up until this point. Although Avalanche isn't necessarily as bad as oh no. Yeah, so my game froze. In the history of using a Nintendo DS, I've literally never had this happen to me, and I can't figure out for the life of me why this would have happened. Unfortunately, the last place I saved was right before I was about to take on Elisa's gym, so I lost the entirety of the progress for this section. It was only a little over an hour at the end of the day, so it's not exactly the biggest deal in the world. I was just genuinely confused as to how something like that could even happen. I usually record most encounters before I actually grind to make editing easier at the end, so I at least didn't lose out on a major chunk of this section. Well, now that we're all caught up, the easiest Pokemon to train by far was Deerling. Although its stats aren't anything to go crazy over, it has immediate access to Jump Kick, which is absurdly powerful even though it's not Stab. You also have Takedown and Energy Ball at your disposal, but generally this is a pretty easy grind to get through. After about 30 minutes, Deerling evolved into Sawsbuck. Because Ducklet gets immediate access to 2 different stab moves, it was also relatively easy to complete. Once you get access to Air Slash at level 27, the battles get a lot easier with potential flinches. But in general, this didn't take too much effort. After an hour of grinding, Ducklet evolved into Swanna. Fungus was definitely a pretty annoying Pokemon to evolve. Now, statistically, in comparison to every other Pokemon here, it's not really different, but depending on the level that you catch it at, you'll have access to only Giga Drain, which means you're going to have to heal a lot to restore your power points. That being said, you should probably catch one before level 27 so you at least have Mega Drain for the later portion of the grind, because although you're pretty close to a Pokemon Center, it becomes pretty annoying after a while. After 2 hours, Fungus evolved into Moongus. To no surprise, Vanillite was by far the hardest Pokemon to evolve. This Pokemon evolves at level 47, which is by far the highest level we've ever had to train up until this point. Although Avalanche isn't necessarily a bad move, Icy Wind's base damage will do a lot more due to your higher special attack stat. So this is another Pokemon that would probably be better off being trained at a lower level. The only other stab move you'll obtain during this grind will be Ice Beam right before your first evolution. But by that point, you'll be dealing big damage with really anything. After about 3.5 hours, Vanillite evolved into Vanillish, and then into Vanilluxe. This brings the total to 81 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon you can obtain before the 5th badge. After taking care of Clay's gym, we can head back to the end of Route 6 with him, so he can open up the entrance to Johnstone Cave. This area has a few story events, but it's also home to nearly half of the encounters for this section. In addition, we also received the Lucky Egg from Professor Juniper, which will cut down the grinding portions massively for the rest of this run. As we make our way through the cave, we can catch Joltik, Ferroseed, Clink, and Tynamo, bringing our dex to 85 Pokemon. After taking on more of Team Plasma and having a quick battle with N, we reach Mistralton City, which is the location for the next gym. For the time being, let's head north and grab a few more encounters. On Route 7, if we change the date to a winter month, we can encounter Cubchoo, which is one of the very few Pokemon that will need a time change for this run. Halfway through this route, we can access the Celestial Tower, which will be the final location for the encounters for this section. Here we can catch Litwick and Elgyem on the way to the top, as we'll need to ring the bell in order to challenge the gym anyways. Twist Mountain is currently blocked off until we complete the 6th gym, so let's go over the evolutions for this section before we jump into all that. As we expect, Audino are at a much higher level this time, with them ranging between levels 26 to 29. This means that we can earn up to around 2200 XP per battle, and considering that some of our Pokemon starting out are under that, there's potential for the yields to be even higher. It's hard to forget, but equipping the Lucky Egg will double the experience for every Audino that you battle, so although we have a ton of high-profile Pokemon for this section, they're all relatively easy to complete because of the ridiculous experience that we get from every Audino. The easiest Pokemon to train by far were Joltik and Cubchoo. Although Electro Ball only has 10 PP, the fact that this move is based on how much faster you are than your opponent, the move deals massive damage no matter what level you're at. Bug Bite is a great option as well. As I mentioned earlier, it has high potential to heal you after each battle, especially if your Joltik has the ability Compound Eyes. On the other hand, Cubchoo is a little bit of an interesting Pokemon to evolve. You're going to want to catch it in the regular grass, as it has access to 0 moves in the doubles grass, with the only one that you can get down the road is Icicle Crash, which you get at the level that you evolve. For the most part, Icy Wind and Brine will be your only options, but considering that Cubchoo has decently high attacking stats, it shouldn't take too long to level this one up. After about 30 minutes for each, Joltik evolved into Galvantula, and Cubchoo evolved into Beartic. Although Litwick may seem like another annoying ghost Pokemon to evolve, having access to Flame Burst from the start makes this one pretty easy to evolve. Your only other option is Inferno at level 38, so I'd stick to that unless you really need to. After about an hour of grinding, Litwick evolved into Lampent, and because I collected a Dust Stone earlier in the run, I was able to immediately evolve it into Chandelure. Ferroseed is generally known as a very defensive Pokemon, so as a result, its moveset isn't exactly the best for grinding. Your primary option is Metal Claw, but Pin Missile and Gyro Ball are okay backup options if you run out of PP. As you reach the higher 30s, it really won't matter which move you use, but the initial battles can be a little bit tedious. After a little over an hour, Ferroseed evolved into Ferrothorn. If you get it at the right level, Elgyem will start out knowing Psybeam, which is really good considering the next special move you'll get is Psychic nearing the end of the grind. If you're in dire need for a backup move, Zen Headbutt is still a solid option, and per usual, it doesn't matter too much once you start reaching the higher levels. After about an hour and a half, Elgyem evolved into Beheeyem. Tynamo initially is a pretty annoying Pokemon to grind up, and that's almost entirely because it doesn't learn a single move until it evolves. Granted, Spark deals quite a lot of damage and will be your primary source of attacking, but this Pokemon is still pretty frail, so I had to spend the first few levels switch training it before I could really battle on its own. After a little under 2 hours, Tynamo evolved into Electric, and with a Thunderstone, it evolved into Electros. Klink was by far the hardest Pokemon to evolve, as it requires about 10 levels more than pretty much everyone else. As always, rare candies help in the end, but working to that point can still be very difficult. Although you have the option to learn quite a few moves during the grind, odds are you're going to just stick with Gear Grind for a majority of your time. Once you evolve, the grinding goes by a lot faster, and for the most part, this is a pretty leisurely grind. After just around 2.5 hours, Klink evolved into Clang, and then into Klinklang. This brings a total to 98 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon available before the 6th badge. After defeating Skylar in her gym, we're able to meet up with Alder, and then access the inside of Twist Mountain. If you're still playing in a winter month, it not only makes this section much easier to traverse, but you have a much better chance of encountering Cryogonal, which is normally a 1% encounter in any other month. Upon exiting the mountain, we're immediately thrown to Icarus City, which is the location of the next gym in our journey. The game doesn't restrict us as much this time though, so we're going to have to put in a little more effort than just catching one Pokemon. If we change the weather to anything but winter, we can venture around Icarus City and catch Shelmet and Stunfisk, which brings us to over 2/3 of the entire Unova Pokedex. If we head to the top of the city, we can go to the entrance of the Dragon Spiral Tower, and while we're not able to actually go inside at the moment, we can still catch a few outside. Here we can catch Mienfoo and Druddigon, which is all that we can obtain for this general area. Although it seems like that's all we can do because we're blocked off on the route ahead, there is one thing that we're forgetting. Alder gave us the HM for Surf, which means that we can backtrack to a couple of old locations for more encounters. If we fly to Driftfield City, we can surf on the water by the lighthouse and interact with the rippling holes to grab a couple new Pokemon. This allows us to add Frillish, Jellicent, and Alamamola to our total. Heading west of the city will bring us back to Route 6, and if we follow the water paths that cut through the entire area, we're able to access Mistralton Cave. As we progress through the area, we're able to catch Axew before entering the Guidance Chamber. Once we have a quick conversation with the old man, we're able to encounter our first legendary, Cobalion. Now normally these encounters are pretty difficult to catch, but since we're able to purchase special Pokeballs like Timer and Dusk Balls, it doesn't take a lot of effort to secure this special Pokemon. After only a few throws, we can add it to the total. Because we started this new side quest, the other 2 legendaries in the trio are unlocked, but because one is farther in the story than we currently are, we can only head back into the first location. If we venture through the Pinwheel Forest and head into the Rumination Field, we can encounter Virizion, who took all of 5 minutes to capture as well. The last new location that we're going to check out for this section is going to be Route 17 and Route 18. If we make our way to the end of the route, we can collect the HM for Waterfall, but also enter this house on the top of the cliff. If we talk to this trainer, they'll offer us an egg that we're going to have to hatch. After biking around for a bit, the egg will hatch into Larvesta. Now it's time to take on some more grinding. As you can probably tell, this section is going to be the shortest level up section that we've had so far, and personally I'm okay with that considering everything that we've gone through. That being said, all the encounters we have to train up are at a significantly high level, so this section still takes quite a bit of effort. When it comes to encounters, level 30 to 33 Audino can be found at the Dragon Spiral Tower. And if you try this in the winter, you'll have the highest chance of finding them at 90%. Worst case scenario, if you don't like the odds, you can always train in the last location and still get a lot of experience. To no surprise, Mienfoo was by far the easiest for a lot of reasons. Obviously a big portion of that is its level, but having immediate access to Force Palm and Drain Punch makes this thing nearly unstoppable against the average Audino. Jump Kick is also available later on, but generally these are the 2 moves you'll use the most. After a little over 30 minutes of grinding, Mienfoo evolved into Manchow. Axew is also a very easy Pokemon to train up, and to most of you that really shouldn't be a surprise. The moveset you start up with is arguably the one that you end with, as Dragon Claw, Slash, and False Swipe are extremely useful both in and out of grinding. The battling portion is still quite a chore, but once you reach the first evolution, you could probably do this blindfolded. After an hour and a half of grinding, Axew evolved into Fracture, and then to Haxorus. Aside from the fact that Larvesta hatched from an egg, this Pokemon was by far the hardest encounter to finish. Being that it's in the slow experience group, it needs a whopping 250,000 experience to level up, and a decent amount of that experience is spent grinding it with the EXP share. Another issue is the fact that it only learns a move every 10 levels, but thankfully most of the moves like Bug Bite and Flame Charge are useful in battle. Because I knew the experience would be ridiculous if Larvesta managed to knock out a Pokemon by itself, I set up a little trick to take advantage of that. I set up Samurott to be low enough of a level to get knocked out from a hit, but I also used False Swipe on it, so in the event that Audino uses Takedown, both Pokemon will faint and only Larvesta will gain experience. Luckily it worked out after a couple tries, and yeah, that's a lot of experience. After about 2.5 hours of grinding, Larvesta evolved into Volcarona, bringing the total to 114 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon available before the 7th badge. Once we defeat Bryson at the gym, we start to really get into the story with Team Plasma, as there are a bunch of story events located at the Dragon Spiral Tower. Once we're allowed to go inside, we can encounter Golett on the first 2 floors, before watching N summon the legendary Pokemon at the top of the tower. From here we can take care of all the events that take place at the Relic Castle, before being able to access more sections of encounters. If we head back to Icarus City and progress through Route 8, we can battle Bianca and meet Getsus at the Tube Line Bridge, before finally reaching some important parts of our challenge. On Route 9 we can catch Pawniard, which completes the second to last location for this section. Once we arrive in Opelucid City, we have to take care of a few more bits of the story gameplay before we can set out on our own. Because this is home for the 8th gym, we really don't have access to many more areas, but we do have one more location that we can visit. Although the east is completely blocked off, we're free to head north to Route 10 to grab the final Pokemon for this section. Here we can grab Bouffalant and Rufflet, which brings us to 118 Pokemon. Now let's take care of the leveling process. Now if you thought last section was simple, boy do I have great news for you. In total we only have 3 Pokemon to evolve, and they're all pretty easy to complete. When it comes to battling Audino, we can encounter higher levels on Route 10, but in turn the encounter rate drops to 80%. Personally, I think the Dragon Spiral Tower is a little bit better, so I chose to take the less experience for more consistent encounters. Golett was by far the easiest Pokemon to train, and even though its moveset is pretty questionable, it was enough to make the grinding pretty straightforward. Dynamic Punch is definitely the best move, but because of its accuracy and PP, you're probably going to use Magnitude most of the time, or the TM for Bulldoze that you get through the story works well too. After about 30 minutes, Golett evolved into Golurk. Pawniard was unsurprisingly very easy to use from the start, as it gets dual stabs with Metal Claw and Assurance, but a lot of its power just comes from its questionably high base attack. You're given a pretty large amount of power points to work with, and considering you resist literally anything Audino throws at you, you really don't need to visit the Pokemon Center too much. After about an hour and a half, Pawniard evolved into Bisharp. Rufflet was definitely the hardest due to its experience group, but that's all compensated for its very strong move pool. If you catch it under level 41, you'll be able to use Aerial Ace, Slash, and Air Slash to sweep through your encounters. You'll start out with a pretty high level advantage, so it doesn't take very long before you can make quick work with your encounters. After a little over an hour and a half, Rufflet evolved into Braviary. This brings the total to 121 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon you can obtain before the 8th badge. So if you're familiar with the previous Professor Oak challenges I've done in the past, you'd know that the next section tends to be the pre-Elite Four section, as you basically have access to every area by now, and the only encounters between now and the post-game are what you can find in Victory Road. This time, however, since there's a Pokemon you can collect after you defeat the Elite Four, but technically before the post-game, there are 2 final sections. I'm going to group them together for this, but you should be able to figure out which Pokemon I'm talking about. Once we defeat Iris's team of Dragon Pokemon, we've collected all 8 badges and are ready to take on the Elite Four. As we're leaving Opelucid City, Professor Juniper will give us the Master Ball, which we're going to use immediately to take care of a special Pokemon. If we head back to Route 7, we can now activate the cutscene with the Roaming Thundurus, which allows one to roam around the region until we come across it. After walking in and out of routes for a little bit, we can quickly encounter one and add this beast to the total. Heading back on the story path, we make our way through Route 10 and have some quick battles with our rivals before reaching the gates to Victory Road. This is going to be the only new location for this section, as we've visited literally every other location that's currently open at this point in the game. If you roam around the inside and outside, we can catch Heatmor, Durant, and Dino, bringing the total to a whopping 125 Pokemon. As we're reaching the top of Victory Road, we can take a side path down to another little location. In this area we can enter the Trial Chamber, which contains our final Pokemon for Victory Road, Terrakion. With a couple Dust Balls, we've collected our last Pokemon for this section, which means that thankfully Dino is the only Pokemon we're going to have to level up at this point. Although the section may seem a little daunting because Dino finally evolves at level 64, it really isn't that difficult with the initial moveset that you're given. Dragon Pulse and Crunch deal massive damage, but you're probably going to favor Crunch because of your higher attack stat. But once you reach your first evolution at level 50, it really won't matter what you use at the end of the day. After about 2.5 hours of grinding, Dino evolved into Zweilous, and then into Hydreigon. This gives us a total of 128 Pokemon, and every Pokemon available before the Elite Four. As you all know, there is one more Pokemon that we're going to have to catch before we tackle the post-game, which means that we're going to have to gather the Dream Team to challenge the Elite Four. Because there are so many high-level evolutions in this game, we can actually build a team for once to cover as many types as we can. With our Dream Team, we have no problem defeating Chantal, Grimsley, Caitlyn, and Marshall, which brings us to the final section of the main story. After N defeats Alder and builds his blow-up house around the Pokemon League, we're able to venture into the area to try and confront him. After reaching the top floor, we meet up with him and summon the other legendary Pokemon, Zekrom. Although it seems like it'd be a difficult Pokemon to catch, the box legendaries are not too much of a problem. So with a few Dust Balls, we've captured the final Pokemon before the end of the main story. At this point, the only thing holding us back from completing the main story is defeating all of Team Plasma. So with our newly acquired legendary and the rest of our powerful team we've built through our long journey, we defeat N and Ghetsis and have completed Pokemon Black and White. Or at least this section of the game. But as you all know, there's a little bit more that we're going to have to do before we complete this whole challenge. We still have to take on the postgame. Now, although it seems like there can't possibly be many more Pokemon available in the game, considering that we've visited nearly every location, I've got some bad news. One of the interesting features included in this game is that once you complete the main story, a whole bunch more Pokemon from previous generations are unlocked in the game, which means that we're going to have to visit a whole bunch more areas in order to collect all the Pokemon that we need. So rather than drag this on any longer than it needs to be, let's just get into a whole bunch of encounters. To start out, let's take care of some of the fishing encounters. These Pokemon can all be found by either using the standard fishing method or by casting the rod inside one of the bubbling fishing spots in the water. On Route 1, we can catch Feebas and Milotic, Finneon, Lumineon, Horsea, Seadra, Kingdra, and Quillfish on Route 17, Chinchou in Driftfield City, Goldeen in Striaton City, Poliwag, Poliwhirl, and Poliwrath in the Wellspring Cave, Politoed on Route 6, Krabby, Kingler, Clamperl, Gorbis, Lovedisc, and Relicanth on Route 4, Barboach on Route 8, and Dratini and Dragonair at the Dragon Spiral Tower. This brings the total to 152 Pokemon. If we head back to Twist Mountain, we can speak with this trainer who will give us a random fossil every single day. This can get a little annoying because you're bound to get repeats, but after a little bit of work we can get Ammonite, Kabuto, Aerodactyl, Lileep, Anorith, Cranidos, and Shieldon. Now let's visit some new areas. Before the Elite Four, we were unable to access basically the entire right half of the region. So let's encounter the very long list of new Pokemon added to this section. On Route 11, we can catch Golduck, Gligar, Zangoose, Seviper, Weasel, Bibarel, Lapras, and Carvana at the Village Bridge, Metapod, Rapidash, Pinsir, Sunkern, Sunflora, Dunsparce, Heracross, Combee, Vespiquen, and Cherim on Route 12, Golbat, Crobat, Tangela, Tangrowth, Swellow, Solrock, Lunatone, Absol, Drifblim, Staryu, Starmie, Wingull, Pelipper, Corsola, Shelder, and Cloyster on Route 13, Piloswine, Sneasel, Delibird, Jinx, Seal, Clefairy, Clefable, Ditto, Metang, and the legendary Kyurem in the Giant Chasm, Mantike, Remoraid, Spheal, and Wailmer Undella Bay, Trey Minchino from Munchlax in the Undella Town, Jigglypuff, Shuckle, Altaria, and Tropius on Route 14, Vulpix, Ninetales, Noctowl, Mischievous, Mismagius, Stantler, Chimecho, Bronzong, Slowpoke, Slowbro, and Slowking at the Abundant Shrine, Fearow, Marowak, Kangaskhan, Pupitar, and Rotom through a Ditto trade on Route 15, Raticate, Venomoth, Ledian, Ariados, and Kricketune in the Dream Yard, Sandslash, Onix, and Claydol in the Relic Castle, and finally, Graveler, Lickitung, Sableye, Mawile, and Riolu in the Challenger's Cave. This brings the total up to 241 Pokemon. Yikes. Up next are the Swarm Pokemon. Just like the other games, Swarm Pokemon change daily, which means you're probably going to have to take a bit of time to encounter everyone here. But thankfully they're all pretty easy to find. With this we can add Farfetch'd, Execute, Wynot, Illumise, Hippopotas, Smeargle, Pineco, Minun, Sentret, Krogunk, Poochyena, Tyrogue, Paris, Doduo, Shuppet, Yanma, and Mankey to the total. Finally, if we head to the Marvelous Bridge, we can purchase a Magikarp from this man for $500. Before we get into the leveling process, we're going to need to breed a lot of Pokemon, so let's take a quick trip back to Striaton City. After biking around for an eternity, we can hatch our eggs to get Rattata, Venonat, Ledyba, Spinarak, Kricketot, Sandshrew, Baltoy, Geodude, Volbeat, Psyduck, Bidoof, Caterpie, Ponyta, Cherubi, Zubat, Tailo, Drifloon, Swinub, Smoochum, Cleffa, Beldum, Igglybuff, Swablu, Hoothoot, Chingling, Bronzor, Spearow, Cubone, and Larvitar. This brings our total to 288 Pokemon, which is all the Pokemon that we can encounter for the final section. But if you haven't learned by now, we still have a lot of evolutions left before we're done. When it comes to evolving your Pokemon, you have the option of either taking on the Elite Four over and over, or unsurprisingly battle Audino on one of the new routes. Personally, I decided to do exactly what I did in the Black and White Catch-em-all, and grind out Audino on Route 14 for the higher level catches. But since there are obviously locations that cover every level range that you need, I took advantage of some of the other Audino locations, so some Pokemon could fight on their own. Although it's only an 85% encounter rate, the experience yields are so insanely high that it doesn't matter too much, and most of the Pokemon that you evolve anyways aren't at too high of a level. With that in mind, let's take care of the final group of Pokemon. After grinding out all of our remaining catches, I was able to evolve them to get Wishcash, Lantern, Seaking, Dragonite, Floatzel, Sharpedo, Dugong, Metagross, Mantine, Octillery, Celio, Walrein, Wailord, Tyranitar, Exeggutor, Wobbuffet, Hippowdon, Fortress, Furret, Toxicroak, Mightyena, Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, Hitmontop, Omastar, Kabutops, Cradily, Armaldo, Rampardos, Bastiodon, Butterfree, Snorlax, Wigglytuff, Gyarados, Parasect, Dodrio, Banette, Primeape, Mamoswine, Yanmega, Licky, Lucario, Weavile, and Gliscor. This brings the total to 332 Pokemon, and all the Pokemon available in one copy of Pokemon White. And with that, we've successfully completed Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Black and White. But how did I do? So let's review. By the time I finished my last evolution, I finished with a time of 124 hours and 35 minutes, which is a little bit longer than I initially expected, and I definitely don't break any records here. But that's kind of par for the course when you take on a challenge of this size. I know some of you might mention the fact that I didn't do any of the Pokemon in the White Forest, and there's a good reason behind that. Each day that passes in game, the White Forest becomes less populated, which means less Pokemon will appear in the area. Because this challenge takes so long to complete, unless you play literally 24/7, by the time that you reach White Forest, all the grass patches and Pokemon will be gone. Because you can only get them back if you connect with another game, the community decided that it's not even worth attempting, so I just wanted to clear that up for anyone who's curious. Overall, this challenge was actually pretty fun to do once you get later into the challenge, but I think that it's no surprise that the beginning wasn't exactly the most fun I've had playing Pokemon. I want to give a big shout out to Wakanarai for creating the guide for these games, and as always, if you're interested in trying this out for yourself, I've included some links in the description to help you complete this challenge in the best way possible. Other than that, that's all there is to say about completing Professor Oak's challenge in Pokemon Black and White. And that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any other suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. If you're interested in watching me take on challenges live, I've been streaming a lot over on my Twitch account, as well as upload highlights on my Johnstone live channel that you can find in the description. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.